When we talk about the elements of mental culpability in New York, known as recklessly and criminal negligence, it might be useful initially to consider that these two elements address New York's answer to the dilemma that I think every system of criminal law must deal with, and that is, when should a person be held criminally responsible for the unintended consequences of that person's conduct? I'm going to say it again. When should a person be held criminally responsible for the unintended consequences of that person's conduct? The criminal law in New York's answer can be found in these two elements. And both of them require, as a building block to understanding, the concept of negligence. And negligence, of course, I should say, if you haven't been there, you'll figure it out when you take the Intro to Law course. Negligence is a cornerstone in the civil law, and indeed, the lawyers up on the billboards are advertising for people to see them who have been injured under circumstances where it would seem that another person's negligence has caused an accident and resulting injuries. So first, we've got to deal with the concept of negligence before we get to what the criminal law is doing in New York with recklessly and criminal negligence. So a down and dirty understanding of negligence is taking a look at the reasonable person who's a hypothetical individual. And that hypothetical individual approaches any situation with the appropriate amount of caution and then sensibly takes action. If we just stop and pause, I think some of the time we act like the reasonable person, and I'll only speak for myself, some of the time I don't. For example, some of the time when I'm driving my car and my hands should be on the wheel and I should be looking at the road, I can't help but take a look at my phone uh, for some reason or another. Maybe it's to change a song. I don't know, but when I'm doing that, I'm negligent. I'm not acting like the reasonable person would have acted. By the way, the reasonable person isn't the perfect person, but the reasonable person really is our collective judgment as to what we expect from each other in terms of due care. Now, negligence by itself, or mere negligence, is not a basis for criminal liability in New York. So the culpable mental states of recklessly and criminal negligence require that there be negligence, but additionally, and let's underline additionally, we need gross or extreme negligence. That's sometimes a matter of dispute. To coin a phrase, it's a matter of degree, but it's really a factual question. In other words, if we're looking at the question, has a person acted with extreme or gross, and I'm using those terms interchangeably in this context. If we're looking at the question, hey, did this person act with extreme or gross negligence? It's a question of fact. If we conclude, however, that a person has acted with extreme or gross negligence, then we have either reckless conduct or criminally negligent conduct. And as I point out, if you were to look at the penal law sections 15053 and 15.054, you would see that criminal negligence and recklessness are identical to that extent in their definitions. So the important question then to ask, if we conclude that there's been extreme or gross negligence, is Is it reckless or is it criminal negligence? And by the way, reckless is a more serious degree of misconduct than is criminal negligence. And I think when we get to the distinction between the two, that will become very clear. And the difference falls in the area of risk perception. So we could say that defendant who acts recklessly is aware of and consciously disregards a substantial and unjustifiable risk. On the other hand, the defendant who acts with criminal negligence fails to perceive a substantial and unjustifiable risk. So the let's call this person the reckless defendant. The reckless defendant is aware that his or her conduct has created this substantial and unjustifiable risk that amounts to an extreme deviation of the standard of care that a reasonable person would have followed, but nevertheless, that person proceeds with his or her conduct. On the other hand, the criminally negligent defendant simply has failed to perceive the risk. And it's always seemed to me that the reckless defendant, uh, if we look at that person's conduct, there's almost a tissue thin difference between recklessness and intent. So let me just, and this is not in the notes, but bring out an example. In where I grew up in the Finger Lakes on Seneca Lake, the Seneca Lake is a very deep lake, and even at the end of the summer, even at the end of a hot summer, the water is very cold. Now, the case I'm thinking about, which happened many years ago, is it was in March. And, we're going to run into that day in March where it's unseasonably warm and everybody seems to want to get outside. And this particular couple had a couple of small children and they had a boat with an outboard motor. So think of a rowboat with a motor that today probably would be put on a sit-down lawnmower, whatever. Uh, so it was a small vessel, as you might imagine. So they go down to the lake on this really beautiful day in March, where everybody thinks it's spring, and they have the boat. They get the boat in the water, and they realize that they forgot to bring their life jackets, which is particularly a problem if you think about it with two kids. So they are still determined apparently to go out boating. So now they're out on the lake uh, in March with two kids who don't have life jackets on. And the water, I can tell you, is ice cold. And now what happens? There's other boats, and if you're out in a smaller boat and the bigger boats go by, especially if they're traveling fast, you get swells in the water, and no one really knew what happened except that the boat overturned, and the two parents were able to save themselves, but the two children drowned. And the question then becomes, uh, what criminal liability, if any, should be placed on the parents? And that brings us to asking a couple of questions. One question would be, was it grossly negligent for them to go out on a boat of that size with two kids without a life jacket? And I think all of us would conclude, yep, that was gross or extreme negligence. And then the harder question might be, should they be charged with reckless homicide, far more serious than the other alternative, which is criminally negligent homicide? And at least the conceptual answer to that question is, can we say that they were aware of and disregarded the risk, or can we say that they simply disregarded the risk? And you might say, well, no question that they were aware of the risk and disregarded it. And then the question becomes, well, uh, they could have been so careless that they truly, or if you will, in fact, weren't aware of the risk. By the way, that case was resolved by pleas of guilty to non-homicidal charges. Whether it should have been or not is a question I don't need to answer. But I think you could see where there could be a sticky or a difficult question of fact. Let me just pick on myself if I can. I always bring this example up in class when people talk about the two parents and say, there's no way they didn't know of the risk. I can remember a time when I was trying to start a charcoal fire, and I had one of these I don't know what you call them, but you put this metal thing over the coal, and you put newspaper under the metal thing, and you put the coal in the funnel, and you light the paper, and it's supposed to start the charcoal that way. And I didn't think it was working, and I was getting impatient. And so what I did is I just took the device out of the grill, and I just had some charcoal, and I decided I'm just going to squirt some charcoal lighter on it and light it. And then matters got worse when I discovered I had no charcoal lighter, and I looked at the corner of the yard was or by a shed was a plastic container of gasoline I used for the lawnmower. And I said to hell with it, and squirted the gasoline on the charcoal. And what I didn't know was that some of the charcoal actually had caught on fire, not on fire. I didn't see it, but it was burning. And so the when I squirted the gasoline on that lump of or that pile of charcoal, the next thing I knew, a flame shot up, knocked the can of gasoline out of my hand, a container of gasoline out of my hand, scared the heck out of me, and for some reason I wasn't injured. And so you would say, well, what I did was profoundly stupid, no doubt, profoundly careless. There's our gross negligence. But if we were going to look at reckless and criminal negligence, I'm going to tell you, and I'm being as truthful as at least a lawyer can be, I was not aware of that risk. You may not choose to believe me, but if you do believe me, I was acting only with, fortunately, no one was hurt, but just in terms of using these concepts, I was acting with criminal negligence and not with acting recklessly. Inconceivably, the parents might have been in that same position. A final wrinkle is that if a person is not aware of a risk because of intoxication, then quite understandably, and for obvious policy reasons, in that case, the lack of awareness still is going to amount to recklessness. So this gives us at least a working summary of criminal negligence and recklessness, and we'll return to it a little bit later when we look at the case of People versus Robert Strong.